Everyone in Millfield knew about Officer Denton. He'd been with the police department for 15 years, and during that time, he built quite a reputation. Not all of it good. The small town of Millfield sat nestled between rolling hills and farmland. Most folks knew each other, at least by face if not by name. The downtown area had just 5 stoplights, a handful of family-owned businesses, and one coffee shop where the older men gathered each morning to talk about weather and politics. It was the kind of place where not much changed, and that's exactly how Officer James Denton liked it. At 43, he had a square jaw, cold eyes, and the kind of posture that said he was used to people doing what he told them to do. He gave my boy a ticket last week for going 3 miles over the speed limit. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store told her customer. 3 miles. But when the mayor's son races down Main Street, suddenly Denton doesn't see anything. Stories like that were common in Millfield. If you were white and had the right last name, Officer Denton might let you off with a warning. If your skin was brown or black, you'd better have all your paperwork perfect and your hands where he could see them. He's just old school, Police Chief Wallace would say whenever someone complained. Denton gets results. Look at his arrest numbers. What the chief didn't mention was how many of those arrests fell apart in court, or how many complaints had been filed against Denton over the years. 27 in total, all of them dismissed or buried in paperwork. At the monthly town council meeting, an older black woman stood up during the public comment section. Her hands shook slightly as she held her notes. My grandson was pulled over 3 times last month by the same officer, she said, 3 times in 30 days, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. Just driving to his night shift at the hospital. A few people nodded. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Chief Wallace cleared his throat. We can't discuss specific officers during public comment period, ma'am. The woman sat down, lips pressed tightly together. Nothing would change. Nothing ever did. That evening, Officer Denton sat at his usual corner table at Lou's Diner. The waitress, Becky, brought his usual coffee and apple pie without him having to order. Anything else, officer? Her smile was professional, but didn't reach her eyes. All good, he replied, not looking up from his phone. 2 younger officers entered the diner and hesitated when they saw him. One whispered something to the other. They chose a table far from his corner. Denton had noticed how the newer officers kept their distance lately. It didn't bother him. He didn't need their friendship, just their respect. And fear could look like respect if you didn't look too closely. He scrolled through his phone to a private social media group where some of the officers shared jokes and stories. His thumb stopped on a post from last week, a photo of a black man being arrested, with crude comments underneath. Denton had added his own comment. Another one for the collection. Outside the diner window, Millfield was quiet as evening settled in. Streetlights flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. Tomorrow would be another day of patrols, traffic stops, and keeping the natural order of things, his version of it anyway. What Officer Denton didn't know was that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would pull over a car with a taillight that wasn't actually broken, and the man inside that car would change everything about Denton's carefully controlled world. But for now, he finished his pie, left his usual small tip, and walked out to his patrol car. He adjusted his badge and gun belt in the reflection of the window. Another day keeping the peace, he said to himself with a satisfied smile, completely unaware that his definition of peace was about to be challenged in ways he could never imagine. The evening air had a slight chill as Andrew Taylor drove home after a long day at his law office. He had only moved to Millfield 3 months ago to be closer to his parents. His father's health was getting worse, and Andrew wanted to be there for both of them. The streetlights cast long shadows across his dark blue sedan as he carefully drove 5 miles under the speed limit, a habit he had developed over years of being extra careful on the road. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. Andrew's heart sank. He hadn't done anything wrong, but experience had taught him to be extremely careful during traffic stops. He pulled over right away, turned off the engine, and placed his hands where they could be seen on the steering wheel. Officer Denton took his time walking up to the car, flashlight beam dancing across Andrew's face. License and registration, he demanded without explaining why he had pulled Andrew over. May I ask what seems to be the problem, officer? Andrew asked politely, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Your left taillight's out, Denton said sharply. Just give me your documents. Andrew knew his taillights were fine. He had checked all his lights just last weekend when he washed his car. But he nodded and spoke clearly. I'm going to reach slowly for my wallet in my back pocket and then get my registration from the glove box. Is that okay? Officer Denton's face hardened. Just hurry up. As Andrew handed over his license and registration, Denton's eyebrows raised slightly when he saw Andrew's profession listed as attorney. The officer's expression darkened. Step out of the car, please. May I ask why, officer? I was just heading home and... Out of the car. Now, each word came out like a hammer hitting stone. Andrew carefully opened the door and stepped out. Standing at his full height of 6 feet, he remained respectful but concerned. I'm going to need to search your vehicle, Denton said. Officer, I don't consent to a search. There's no probable cause here. Denton's face flushed red. You trying to tell me how to do my job? Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Sir, I'm not. Before Andrew could finish, Denton grabbed his arm and spun him around, pushing him roughly against the car. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Andrew's wrists as Denton tightened them several clicks beyond necessary. You're under arrest for resisting an officer, Denton growled. I wasn't resisting, Andrew said calmly, though his heart pounded in his chest. This is a mistake. Denton ignored him and roughly guided Andrew to the police car. As they walked, the officer's eyes fixed on Andrew's well-kept dreadlocks, which he had grown and maintained for the past 10 years. Fancy hair for a troublemaker, Denton muttered, shoving Andrew's head down as he pushed him into the back seat. The ride to the police station was silent and tense. Andrew tried to stay calm, thinking about his parents waiting for him at home, probably starting to worry. He thought about his rights, about the complete absence of any reason for his arrest. But mostly he thought about the unfairness that he had tried so hard to fight against as a lawyer. At the station, they took his belongings, his belt, his tie, and his shoelaces. The booking officer seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation, but said nothing as Denton hovered nearby. Those fancy dreadlocks won't look so good in your mugshot, Denton sneered as Andrew stood against the height chart for his photo. Maybe we should clean you up a bit before your court appearance tomorrow. Andrew didn't respond, keeping his dignity intact despite the humiliation. He knew engaging with Denton would only make things worse. As they led him to a holding cell, he caught Denton talking to a younger corrections officer, pointing at Andrew's hair and laughing. That night, lying on the hard bench in his cell, Andrew thought about his new job that was supposed to start next week. He thought about his parents who would be sick with worry when he didn't show up. And he wondered if anyone in this town would believe his side of the story against a police officer who had been there for 15 years. What Andrew didn't know was that things were about to get much worse before they got better, and Officer Denton had no idea who he had just arrested. Andrew barely slept that night. The cell was cold, the bench hard, and worry kept his mind racing. He'd never been arrested before. As a lawyer, he had stood beside many clients in courtrooms, but he never imagined he would be the one in handcuffs. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lights and the rattling of keys. A young corrections officer Andrew hadn't seen before opened the cell door. Time to get ready for your hearing, the officer said, not unkindly. Andrew stood up, his back stiff from the uncomfortable night. What time is my hearing? 9:30, but first we need to get you cleaned up. Andrew was led down a hallway to a small room. His stomach dropped when he saw Officer Denton waiting there with another corrections officer. A chair sat in the middle of the room. Next to it was a table with electric clippers. What's going on? Andrew asked, his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. Denton smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. Department policy. All inmates need to be properly groomed before court appearances. That's not true, Andrew said firmly, drawing on his legal knowledge. There's no such policy. Look at that, Denton said to the other officers. He thinks he knows more about our procedures than we do. He pointed to the chair. Sit down. Andrew stood his ground. I refuse. This is against my rights. The next few minutes happened in a blur. The two corrections officers grabbed Andrew's arms while Denton forced him into the chair. Despite Andrew's protests and struggles, they held him down. Denton picked up the clippers, turned them on, and brought them to Andrew's head. "This is illegal," Andrew shouted. "Stop this right now." Denton didn't stop. The vibration of the clippers against Andrew's scalp sent chills down his spine as his dreadlocks, 10 years of growth, a symbol of his heritage and identity, fell to the floor in clumps. "Looks like you've got a court date with destiny," Denton laughed as he roughly moved the clippers across Andrew's head. The other officers looked uncomfortable but said nothing. One of them even looked away. When it was over, Andrew's head was unevenly shaved, with small cuts where the clippers had caught his skin. No one offered him a mirror. No one apologized. They simply led him back to his cell to wait for his court appearance. An hour later, Andrew was escorted to the courtroom in handcuffs, his head exposed and still stinging in places. He felt naked, vulnerable. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, but it was his missing hair that made him feel truly stripped of dignity. As he entered the courtroom, he heard gasps from the small morning crowd. A few people whispered. An older woman in the back row covered her mouth in shock. Andrew kept his eyes forward, refusing to show how deeply this humiliation cut him. He had spent his career fighting for justice, and now he stood before the court, literally bearing the wounds of injustice on his own body. The bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Wilson." The judge, a thin man with silver hair and sharp eyes, took the bench. He looked down at the papers before him, then at Andrew. For just a second, something flickered across the judge's face, recognition, then shock, then a carefully controlled return to professional composure. Case number 2023 CR 157, State v. Andrew Taylor, the clerk announced. Judge Wilson looked directly at Andrew. "Mr. Taylor, you're charged with resisting an officer. How do you plead?" Andrew stood as straight as his tighted body would allow. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge's eyes moved from Andrew's face to his freshly shaved and cut scalp, then to Officer Denton, who stood at the prosecutor's table looking smug. "Mr. Taylor, are you represented by counsel?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor. I was arrested last night without cause and haven't been allowed to make a phone call." The judge frowned. "And may I ask what happened to your head, Mr. Taylor?" Before Andrew could answer, Denton stepped forward. "Standard procedure, Your Honor. For hygiene purposes." Judge Wilson's eyebrows raised slightly. "Is that so? Interesting that in my 15 years on this bench, I've never seen an arrestee treated quite like this before their first appearance, especially not one arrested for a minor charge." Andrew felt a tiny spark of hope as the judge continued to study his paperwork. What he didn't know was that this moment of humiliation was about to become a turning point, not just for his case, but for the entire town of Millfield. Judge Wilson studied the paperwork in front of him one more time, then looked up at Officer Denton with a steady gaze. "Officer, I'm dismissing these charges immediately for lack of probable cause," he said firmly. "Mr. Taylor, you're free to go." Officer Denton's face flushed red. "Your Honor, this man was clearly resisting." "That will be all, officer," Judge Wilson cut him off. "Mr. Taylor, the court apologizes for your treatment. You're free to leave." The bailiff removed Andrew's handcuffs. As Andrew rubbed his sore wrists, Judge Wilson called him forward. "Mr. Taylor, could you please approach the bench?" Andrew walked forward, feeling the stares of everyone in the courtroom on his unevenly shaved head. Judge Wilson leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Andrew Taylor, I thought it was you. We need to speak privately. Please wait for me in my chambers. My clerk will show you the way." Confused but relieved, Andrew followed the clerk through a side door while Officer Denton stormed out of the courtroom. The clerk led him to a well-appointed office with dark wooden furniture and law books lining the walls. Andrew sat down, his hand instinctively reaching up to touch his damaged scalp. 10 minutes later, Judge Wilson entered and closed the door. "Mr. Taylor, I owe you a sincere apology on behalf of this court and this town," he said, taking off his robes and hanging them carefully on a coat rack. "What happened to you is inexcusable." "Thank you, Your Honor," Andrew replied. "But I'm confused. Do we know each other?" Judge Wilson sat down across from him. "We haven't met in person, but I certainly know who you are. You're Andrew Taylor, the attorney who clerked for Judge Rodriguez at the federal level. You've won several major civil rights cases. And more importantly, you're the person who's been appointed to fill the judicial vacancy in the Eastern District Court. Andrew's eyes widened. How did you know that? I've kept it quiet since I moved here. Judges talk, Wilson said with a small smile. When a promising young attorney gets appointed to the bench, especially one with your record, word gets around. I was hoping to invite you to dinner once you were settled. I never imagined our first meeting would be like this. Andrew looked down at his orange jumpsuit. Not exactly how I planned to make a first impression. That officer had no idea who you were, did he? Judge Wilson asked. No, Andrew replied. Not that it should matter. No one should be treated this way. Judge Wilson nodded solemnly. You're absolutely right. And that's precisely why I think you're going to be an excellent judge. He paused. Officer Denton has a history of complaints, but nothing ever sticks. The department protects him. Andrew thought for a moment. The Eastern District Court, that's where most of the police testimony for this county happens, isn't it? It is indeed, Wilson confirmed. Your courtroom will be 4B, just down the hall from mine. And I have a feeling Officer Denton appears there quite regularly. A heavy silence filled the room as both men contemplated the implications. I'm not interested in revenge, Andrew said finally. That's not why I became a lawyer or why I accepted the judgeship. Of course not, Wilson agreed. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and fairness. Judge Wilson stood up and walked to a closet in the corner of his chambers. He pulled out a clean suit, shirt, and tie. My son sometimes stays over when we work late. He's about your size. Please take these for now. Andrew accepted the clothes gratefully. When do I start? The official letter said next Monday. That's right, Wilson replied. You'll have a week to recover before you take the bench. And I've been told Officer Denton is scheduled to testify in a drug possession case next Thursday. Andrew changed into the borrowed clothes, his mind racing with thoughts of the past 24 hours, from respected attorney to humiliated arrestee to being on the verge of becoming a judge who would preside over cases involving the very officer who had degraded him. What happens next is up to you, Judge Wilson said, extending his hand. But whatever you decide, do it with the same integrity that earned you this position in the first place. Andrew shook his hand firmly. I intend to. Justice should be blind, but it should never be silent. The following Thursday arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. Officer Denton walked up the courthouse steps with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. He straightened his uniform tie and checked his watch, right on time for the Henderson drug possession case. The courthouse hallways bustled with the usual morning activity, lawyers with briefcases hurrying between rooms, nervous defendants waiting on benches, clerks carrying stacks of files. Denton nodded at a few familiar faces as he made his way toward courtroom 4B. Big day, Denton? Asked a fellow officer who was leaving another courtroom. Just another day putting away criminals, Denton replied with a smirk. This one's a slam dunk. Found the stuff right in the guy's glove compartment during a routine traffic stop. The officer raised his eyebrows. Good luck. I heard there's a new judge in 4B. No idea what to expect. Denton shrugged. New judge, old judge, doesn't matter. Once I'd give my testimony, it's over. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B and strode confidently inside. The room was half full, with the usual mix of people waiting for their cases to be called. Denton spotted the prosecutor at the front table and walked over. Morning, counselor, he said. We good to go on Henderson. The prosecutor, a young woman with sharp eyes, nodded. Should be called any minute. The new judge is very punctual from what I hear. Any idea who they brought in? Denton asked. Before she could answer, the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. The Honorable Judge Andrew Taylor presiding. Denton turned toward the bench, his hand already rising in a casual salute to the new judge. Then he froze. The blood drained from his face as he watched the black robes swishing forward. There, taking the bench with calm dignity, was the man whose head he had forcibly shaved just 1 week ago. But now, instead of an orange jumpsuit, he wore the black robes of judicial authority. Instead of sitting handcuffed at the defendant's table, he was sitting at the judge's bench, above everyone else in the room. Judge Taylor took his seat and looked out across the courtroom. His eyes met Denton's for just a brief moment, no smile, no frown, just a clear, steady gaze. Then he looked down at his docket. "Good morning, everyone. We have several cases to get through today, so let's begin promptly." Denton couldn't move. His legs felt like they were made of cement. The prosecutor nudged him. "What's wrong with you?" she whispered. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Denton swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. That's him," he managed to say. "Him who?" the prosecutor asked, confused. "The guy from last week, the one I arrested for resisting. The one who's—" Denton couldn't finish the sentence. Recognition dawned on the prosecutor's face. "Wait, are you saying you arrested Judge Taylor?" "The new district judge." Denton nodded, still staring at the bench. Judge Taylor was calmly reviewing paperwork, giving no indication that anything was unusual. His recently shaved head was now covered with a very short layer of new growth, but the uneven patches where the clippers had cut too close were still visible. "The state calls case number 2023 CR 205, State versus Henderson," the clerk announced. Both counsel approached the bench. Judge Taylor said, his voice calm and professional. The prosecutor grabbed her files and walked forward. She looked back at Denton, who still hadn't moved. "Officer Denton," Judge Taylor called out. "You're the arresting officer in this case, correct? Please approach as well." Denton's legs finally remembered how to work. Each step toward the bench felt like walking through deep water. As he got closer, he could see faint marks on Judge Taylor's scalp where the clippers had nicked him. "Your Honor," Denton began, his voice cracking slightly. "I had no idea." "We're here to discuss the Henderson case, officer," Judge Taylor interrupted, his voice firm but not angry. "Save any personal matters for another time. Now, counselor, I have some questions about the search that led to this arrest." As Judge Taylor began discussing legal points with the prosecutor, Denton stood there speechless, realizing that his world had just turned upside down, and that his actions were about to catch up with him in ways he never could have imagined. Judge Taylor listened carefully as the Henderson case unfolded in his courtroom. The young man was accused of possessing illegal substances that Officer Denton had supposedly found during a traffic stop, a situation that felt all too familiar to the judge. "Officer Denton," Judge Taylor said when it was time for testimony, "please take the stand." Denton walked stiffly to the witness stand, his usual confident swagger replaced by hesitation. After being sworn in, he sat down, avoiding direct eye contact with the judge. "Officer, please tell the court about your traffic stop of Mr. Henderson on the night of April 15th, the prosecutor prompted. Denton cleared his throat. "I pulled over the defendant for speeding. He was doing 45 in a 30 zone. When I approached the vehicle, I noticed he seemed nervous. Based on my 15 years of experience, this raised red flags." "And what happened next?" the prosecutor asked. "I asked him to step out of the vehicle. For officer safety, you understand. Then I conducted a search of the vehicle and found the substances in the glove compartment." Judge Taylor leaned forward slightly. "Officer Denton, did you ask for consent to search the vehicle?" Denton shifted in his seat. "Well, I had probable cause, Your Honor." "What was that probable cause specifically?" Judge Taylor asked, his tone neutral and professional. "As I mentioned, he seemed nervous. His hands were shaking." "Did you observe any other behavior that would constitute probable cause for a search?" the judge pressed. Denton hesitated. He was in a high-crime area. "The corner of Maple and Pine is considered a high-crime area?" Judge Taylor asked. "Well, not exactly that specific corner. For the record," Judge Taylor said, "Mr. Henderson's address is 3 blocks from that intersection. Was he in fact heading home?" "Possibly," Denton admitted. "I didn't ask." The defense attorney perked up, sensing weakness in the officer's testimony. "Your Honor, may I question the witness about the search?" "Please proceed," Judge Taylor said. For the next 20 minutes, Judge Taylor allowed a thorough examination of Officer Denton's procedure that night. He didn't interrupt or show any sign of personal feelings toward the officer. Instead, he simply held Denton to the exact standards required by law, something that had rarely happened in this courthouse before. When the questioning revealed that Denton had searched the car without consent or legitimate probable cause, Judge Taylor didn't show satisfaction or anger. He simply nodded and took notes. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, "I move to suppress all evidence obtained from the illegal search." "The court will take a 15-minute recess to consider the motion," Judge Taylor announced. In his chambers, Judge Taylor reviewed the case law carefully. He thought about his own experience with Denton, the humiliation, the pain, the injustice. For a brief moment, he felt the temptation to let those feelings guide his decision. But that wasn't who he was or what he believed in. Justice had to be blind, even when personal hurt was involved. When court resumed, all eyes were on Judge Taylor as he delivered his ruling. "Based on the testimony provided and the relevant case law, I find that Officer Denton conducted an illegal search of Mr. Henderson's vehicle without proper probable cause or consent. The evidence obtained from this search is therefore suppressed." The prosecutor's shoulders slumped, knowing the case was essentially over. "Furthermore," Judge Taylor continued, "I am referring this matter to the Police Oversight Committee for review of Officer Denton's conduct in this case and potentially others. This court cannot allow violations of citizens' constitutional rights, regardless of the outcome." Word spread quickly through the courthouse about what had happened. By lunchtime, 3 different defense attorneys had scheduled meetings to discuss other cases involving Officer Denton. A reporter from the local newspaper sat in on the afternoon session, taking careful notes. After court adjourned for the day, Judge Taylor remained at his desk, reviewing files for tomorrow's cases. A knock came at his chamber door. "Come in," he called. Judge Wilson entered, a small smile on his face. "I heard what happened this morning. You handled it exactly by the book." Judge Taylor nodded. "The law is the law. It applies to everyone equally. Even when it's personal?" Wilson asked. "Especially then," Taylor replied. "I didn't need to bend the rules to expose what happened. The truth came out all on its own." As Wilson left, Judge Taylor picked up a pen and began drafting a formal complaint about his own treatment during his arrest. Not out of revenge, but because the system could only heal if the light of truth shined on its darkest corners. 6 months passed. The trees in Millfield had shed their summer green for autumn gold and red. Inside the courthouse, changes just as dramatic had taken place. Officer Denton sat alone on a park bench across from the building where he had once strutted with such confidence. He wasn't in uniform anymore. The investigation triggered by Judge Taylor's complaint had uncovered a pattern of misconduct spanning years: unlawful searches, racial profiling, excessive force, and falsified reports. 3 weeks ago, the police chief had given him a choice: resign quietly or face a public hearing. Denton chose to resign. No pension, no farewell party, no plaque celebrating his years of service. Just a cardboard box with his personal items and a walk of shame past coworkers who suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Across town, Judge Taylor was meeting with a group of police officers and community members in the courthouse conference room. His hair had grown back somewhat, though not yet to the length of his former dreadlocks. More importantly, his dignity and purpose had fully returned. "The goal isn't to create distrust between police and citizens," Judge Taylor explained to the group. "It's to build real trust based on respect and accountability." An older officer raised his hand. "With all due respect, Judge, why should we listen to someone who clearly has it out for cops?" A few people shifted uncomfortably, but Judge Taylor just smiled. "Fair question. I don't have it out for police officers. I have it out for abuse of power, whether it comes from a judge, a lawyer, or yes, a police officer. Most of you do your jobs with honor. You deserve to work alongside others who do the same." The officer nodded slowly, not fully convinced but willing to listen. After the meeting, Judge Taylor walked to his parents' house for dinner, something he did every Thursday night. His father's health had improved slightly, and his mother had joined the community dialogue program as a senior advisor. "How was your day?" his mother asked as she set a plate of food in front of him. "Good," he replied. "The dialogue program is finally getting traction. We had 6 new officers join today." His father looked up from his meal. "And what about that officer? The one who did this to you?" He gestured toward his son's head. Judge Taylor put down his fork. "I heard he's leaving town. Got a security job at a mall down south." "Good riddance," his father muttered. Judge Taylor shook his head. "It's not about one bad officer, Dad. It was never just about him. It's about changing a system that let him get away with it for 15 years. After dinner, Judge Taylor walked home, greeting neighbors along the way. People knew his story now. It had made the local papers and even some national news. The judge who got justice was how one headline put it. But that wasn't how Judge Taylor saw it. True justice wasn't about what happened to Officer Denton. It was about what was happening in Millfield now. The police department had implemented new training programs and oversight measures. The town council had established a civilian review board. 3 other officers with troubling records had been put on administrative leave pending investigation. Most importantly, people who had suffered in silence for years were finally speaking up. At home, Judge Taylor looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. His hair was growing back, but differently than before. He had decided not to regrow his dreadlocks, not because of shame, but as a reminder. Sometimes transformation required letting go of what was lost and growing something new. On his desk lay a letter from the State Judicial Committee asking if he would consider a permanent appointment to the bench when his temporary term ended. Next to it was an invitation to speak at the police academy about constitutional rights during arrests. He picked up a framed photo of himself from law school, standing proudly outside the courthouse where he had first interned. He had believed then that the law could be a force for good, that justice was possible even in an imperfect system. Now, after everything that had happened, he believed it even more strongly. Not because the system was perfect, it clearly wasn't, but because people within it could choose to do better. Officer Denton had made his choice. Judge Taylor had made his. And because of those choices, Millfield was slowly but surely becoming a different kind of town. Sometimes, he thought as he placed the photo back on his desk, true justice wasn't about punishment, it was about transformation.